January 6, 2026, 1:12 in the morning. The western edge of Toretsk, Donetsk Oblast. A thermal drone drifts over a shattered brick building on Shevchenko Street. For 3 weeks, Ukrainian commanders have logged this building as empty. No movement, no heat, no radio chatter on any intercepted frequency. Tonight the screen tells a different story. 12 heat signatures, stacked along the back wall of a cellar. A generator running somewhere beneath the rubble, warm enough to bleed through solid brick. The operator freezes for a second, then keys his radio. Command needs to hear this now. Nobody expected this. Every daylight pass over that cellar for 21 straight days had shown nothing but cold masonry and collapsed roofing. A Ukrainian recon team had been scheduled to move directly past that building at dawn. If the drone hadn't caught this at 1:12 a.m., they would have walked within 30 meters of a full Russian assault squad without knowing it. The question isn't just how 12 men hid in plain sight for 3 weeks. It's what they were waiting for. The call sign on the drone feed that night was Sokil, Ukrainian for Falcon. 26 years old, a former electrician from Kryvyi Rih, now flying reconnaissance for a unit known across the front as Birds of Magyar. He'd been at this specific cellar for 9 straight overnight shifts, convinced something didn't add up. Birds of Magyar isn't a nickname invented for a video title. It's a real formation, built around the reconnaissance and strike doctrine of Commander Robert Brovdy, call sign Magyar, one of the most recognized drone commanders in the Ukrainian armed forces. His units fly a mixed fleet, heavy multi-rotor bombers nicknamed Baba Yaga, thermal reconnaissance platforms, and swarms of FPV strike drones that cost less than a used car and can destroy something worth millions. The building in question sat roughly 800 meters from the nearest confirmed Ukrainian position, in a stretch of Toretsk that had been fought over block by block since the summer of 2024. By late 2025, the front line here had stabilized into something closer to a slow-motion siege. Ukrainian forces held pockets on the western outskirts. Russian units controlled the shattered center and pushed probing attacks westward almost nightly. The cellar itself belonged to what had once been a 2-story administrative building attached to a coal processing depot. Its upper floors were gone, collapsed inward by artillery months earlier. What remained was a reinforced brick basement with 3-foot walls, built decades ago to survive Soviet-era industrial accidents. It was, in effect, a bunker that nobody had designed as one. That's what made it dangerous, and that's what made it nearly invisible. Every daylight thermal pass showed the same cold signature as the collapsed floors around it. Brick holds heat differently than flesh, and 3 feet of it is enough to mask a sleeping man from most standard thermal optics during a hot afternoon. Ukrainian analysts had flagged the site as low priority. Dead structure. Move on. Then, in mid-December, an intercepted Russian radio transmission changed the picture. A fragment, barely 11 seconds long, referenced a night position near the depot and a planned push west before the new moon. Ukrainian signals intelligence couldn't pin the exact building, but the timing lined up with reports from 2 separate infantry positions describing faint engine noise after dark, somewhere near the depot ruins. Sokil's commander, call sign Voron, made the call. Assign a dedicated night bird to that one building, every night, no exceptions, even if it meant burning batteries on a target that had shown nothing for 3 straight weeks. I spent hours going through the mission logs for this sector, and one detail kept nagging me. The drone crew never got a single daylight confirmation. Not once in 21 days. They were flying blind on faith and 1 radio fragment, and command let them keep flying anyway. That's not standard procedure. That's a bet. The bet almost didn't pay off. 2 separate drones assigned to the nightly patrol were lost to Russian electronic warfare jamming in the first 10 days, both crashing into no man's land within 400 meters of the target building. A third suffered a camera gimbal failure mid-flight on December 29th, forcing an emergency return with grainy, unusable footage. 3 attempts, 3 failures. The cellar kept its secret. Sokil almost asked to be reassigned. 3 weeks of night shifts, staring at cold brick, will do that to a person. What kept him on target wasn't intuition. It was the memory of that 11-second radio intercept, replaying in his head every time the screen showed nothing. On the night of January 5th into January 6th, conditions finally lined up. Clear sky, minimal ground fog. No jamming detected on the usual frequencies. Sokil launched at 12:47 a.m., climbing to just under 400 meters, well above small arms range, and began his approach toward the depot ruins from the northeast, angling to catch the cellar's back wall, rather than its heavily obscured front entrance. At 1:09 a.m., the drone crossed the tree line bordering the depot. At 1:12 a.m., the thermal feed bloomed. Not one heat signature. 12. They were arranged in 2 rows against the cellar's rear wall, exactly where the brick was thickest, and the daylight cold mask had been most effective. Between them, a smaller, intensely bright rectangle. The generator. Running low, likely to preserve fuel, but running. Command has been sitting on a dead building for 3 weeks. In one frame, it becomes the single most dangerous position on this stretch of the line. What Sokil captured over the following 6 minutes is rarely released outside internal unit debriefs. Weapons racked along one wall, visible as slightly warmer linear shapes against the cooling brick. A stove or heater near the generator. And crucially, a second, smaller room, branching off the main cellar, where 4 additional signatures sat clustered around what analysts later identified as a field radio setup. This wasn't a rest stop. This was a staging point. A full assault squad, rotating in after dark, sleeping through daylight hours precisely because they knew Ukrainian thermal passes ran hardest in the afternoon heat, and weakest in the deep cold of a Donbass winter night. Except this time, someone had flown the weakest hour anyway. Here's what's most surprising about this case. It isn't that Russian soldiers found a clever hiding spot. Military history is full of clever hiding spots. What's strange is that Ukrainian command was willing to burn 3 drones and 3 weeks of dedicated flight time on a building that showed absolutely nothing, based on 11 seconds of intercepted radio chatter. Most units would have reassigned that asset after the first week. Voron's gamble worked because he trusted a single fragment of signals intelligence over 3 weeks of visual evidence saying otherwise. That's not a comfortable way to run an operation. It's also, in this case, the only reason 12 Russian soldiers didn't ambush a Ukrainian recon team walking past what everyone assumed was an empty ruin. The cellar's secret was out. 12 heat signatures, a generator, a weapons cache, and a radio room. What command didn't yet know was exactly when that squad planned to move, or how many more nights they intended to wait before the counterattack Voron's intercept had warned about. That answer was about to arrive faster than anyone expected. At 1:19 a.m., 7 minutes after the initial reveal, one of the 12 signatures shifted position. Then, another. Ukrainian analysts monitoring the live feed from a command post 2 kilometers back initially worried the squad had detected the drone. Standard doctrine says, disengage immediately if compromised. Sokil held position instead. The movement wasn't alarm. It was a shift change. 4 of the 12 men rose, moved toward the radio room, and appeared to relieve 4 others, who then lay down along the back wall. A rotating watch. Disciplined. Practiced. This wasn't a squad's first night in that cellar. That single detail told Ukrainian intelligence more than the radio intercept had. A rotating watch schedule meant this wasn't a temporary shelter from artillery. It was an established forward staging position, likely occupied for at least several nights running, undetected the entire time. Put yourself in Voron's position for a second. You're staring at a screen showing 12 armed men 800 meters from your own troops, in a building your own maps have marked as empty for 3 weeks. You have roughly 4 hours of darkness left, before sunrise burns off your thermal advantage. What do you do with that window? He didn't call for artillery. A barrage on a single reinforced cellar risked scattering survivors into the surrounding ruins, where they could regroup for exactly the counterattack the original intercept had warned about. What he needed was precision, a way to collapse the position before it could disperse. The order went out at 1:41 a.m. Two FPV strike teams, call signs Haram and Bulava, scrambled from a launch point 600 meters behind the Ukrainian line. Each pilot carried 3 drones. Cost per unit, roughly $500, fitted with repurposed RPG-7 warheads. Combined cost of the entire strike package, under $3,000, aimed at a position sheltering a squad whose equipment, ammunition, and small arms were worth many times that. Most people assume a fortified cellar with 3-foot brick walls is essentially immune to small first-person view drones. The evidence from this exact strike says otherwise. It isn't the warhead punching through solid brick that does the damage. It's the doorway and the firing ports, the exact same gaps the squad was using to move in and out, that the strike drones threaded instead. Sokil kept the thermal bird on overwatch, feeding real-time coordinates to the strike pilots as the 12 signatures below shifted again, unaware anything had changed. At 2:03 a.m., the first FPV drone entered its terminal approach. 20 minutes from strike time, a complication nobody had planned for. Ground fog, thin but rolling in fast from a drainage ditch 200 meters south of the target, began degrading the FPV pilot's visual feed. Haram's first drone lost lock on its approach vector and had to abort, curving away and circling for a second attempt, burning precious minutes off a shrinking window of darkness. Command considered pulling the strike entirely and waiting for a clearer night. Voron overruled it. Delay meant risking daylight discovery of the drone's presence, which meant risking the squad packing up and vanishing before a second attempt could be arranged. Bulava's team pushed the strike forward, using the thermal drone's feed as a secondary reference instead of pure visual guidance. A workaround improvised in real time over an open radio channel. It worked. At 2:11 a.m., the recalibrated first drone struck the cellar's main doorway directly, collapsing the entrance frame and burying the immediate approach under brick and rebar. One entrance sealed. 11 signatures remained visible on the thermal feed, scrambling now, clearly aware something had gone catastrophically wrong. What they didn't know yet was that Haram's second and third drones were already inbound, targeting the improvised firing ports along the cellar's north wall before a single one of them could return fire. The next 90 seconds were the fastest of the entire operation. Haram's second drone struck a firing port at 2:13 a.m., the explosion visible on thermal as a sudden flare that washed out nearly a third of the frame. Bulava's remaining drone followed 4 seconds later, targeting the radio room where the smaller cluster of 4 signatures had been tracked throughout the night. By 2:20 a.m., the thermal feed showed a dramatically altered scene. Structural collapse across roughly half the cellar's footprint. 3 heat signatures no longer moving. Several others fragmented into smaller, dimmer traces, consistent with survivors attempting to crawl toward what remained of a rear exit. What strikes me about this whole sequence is how little of it depended on expensive technology. A drone that costs roughly the same as a decent laptop found what 3 weeks of standard patrols missed. Strike drones that cost less than a used bicycle did what would once have required an artillery barrage and all the collateral risk that comes with it. This is what modern frontline warfare increasingly looks like. Cheap, attritable hardware closing gaps that used to require far heavier and far more expensive systems. The counterattack that Russian command had apparently planned to launch from this exact position never happened. Ukrainian signals monitoring in the following 72 hours picked up no further radio traffic referencing a westward push near the depot. Whatever coordination had been building around that cellar, it collapsed along with the building itself. Here's the take that will probably get some pushback. Some analysts watching this footage afterward argued the strike was excessive, that a position this contained could have been left for infantry to handle at daylight, with less risk of unnecessary casualties on the Russian side. I don't buy that. A rotating 12-man assault squad staged 800 meters from friendly lines, invisible for 3 weeks, was exactly the kind of threat that gets Ukrainian soldiers killed in an ambush nobody saw coming. Waiting for daylight risked losing the position entirely, and risked the exact counterattack the original intercept had warned about. The math on that trade-off isn't close. What do you think? Was collapsing that cellar the only responsible call available at 2 a.m. with a narrowing window of darkness? Or should command have waited and risked losing the advantage entirely? There's a real argument on both sides, and I'd genuinely like to hear where you land. By 2:47 a.m., thermal readings across the cellar had dropped sharply. The generator, which had first betrayed the position over an hour earlier, had gone dark, likely destroyed in the second strike, or simply out of fuel with no one left to refuel it. 4 faint signatures remained near what had been the rear exit, moving slowly, consistent with wounded survivors attempting to withdraw east under cover of the remaining darkness. Ukrainian command made a decision at this point that a lot of viewers find uncomfortable to hear. Rather than send a follow-up strike to finish clearing the position, Voron ordered the drones to hold overwatch and let the survivors withdraw. The building had been neutralized as a staging point. Chasing down 4 wounded men, crawling away from a collapsed cellar, risked burning drones and daylight for marginal military value. The building that had looked empty for 3 weeks was now confirmed destroyed as a functioning position. But the story doesn't end with the strike. What happened over the following 72 hours reshaped how this entire sector of the front was mapped, and it started with a discovery nobody was looking for. On January 8th, a Ukrainian reconnaissance team finally advanced through the depot ruins in daylight, the same route that had been scheduled to pass directly by the cellar 3 days earlier. What they found inside confirmed almost everything the thermal footage had suggested, and added one detail nobody had anticipated. Stockpiled inside a side chamber, partially protected from the strikes by an interior wall, were roughly 40 artillery rounds, several crates of small arms ammunition, and 2 anti-tank rocket launchers. This wasn't simply a rest position for a rotating infantry squad. It was a forward supply cache, positioned to support exactly the kind of push west that the original December intercept had described. The strike hadn't just neutralized 12 men. It had removed a logistics node the Russian counterattack plan almost certainly depended on. There's one detail from the recon team's report that stuck with me more than the casualty figures. Scratched into the brick, near what had been the radio room, in Cyrillic, was a set of tally marks. 19 of them. Nobody has been able to confirm exactly what they counted. Days in the cellar, successful watch rotations, something else entirely. It's a small thing, but it's the kind of detail that turns a tactical strike into a human story, whether anyone wants it to or not. Sector commanders redrew their operational map within 48 hours. The depot ruins, previously marked as a low-priority dead zone, were reclassified as a contested forward position, requiring nightly thermal coverage. 2 additional drone crews were assigned to similar structures within a 1-kilometer radius, on the theory that if one hardened cellar had concealed a staging squad undetected for 3 weeks, others plausibly could too. That theory was confirmed faster than anyone expected. On January 11th, a follow-up thermal sweep of a separate basement, 400 meters south of the original site, picked up 6 additional heat signatures, in a structure that had likewise shown nothing on repeated daylight passes. Whether that position connects to the same planned counterattack remains unconfirmed, but the pattern is now impossible for Ukrainian command to ignore. There's a piece of this story we couldn't fully verify on camera, involving how command first narrowed down which building along that entire depot perimeter to watch out of dozens of candidates. If enough of you want the fuller signals intelligence side of this, drop a comment and we'll dig into a follow-up. For Russian forces operating in this sector, The tactical lesson has apparently already landed. Intercepted communications in the weeks following the strike show a marked increase in units avoiding prolonged occupation of any single structure, rotating between multiple partial shelters rather than settling into one position for more than a night or two. It's a direct, if grudging, acknowledgement that Ukrainian night thermal coverage has become the primary threat to static positions in this sector, more dangerous now than daylight artillery observation ever was. Sokil, for his part, has continued flying the same overnight rotation along the depot perimeter. He told his unit's after-action debrief that the 3 weeks of nothing before January 6th were the hardest stretch of his deployment, not because the flying was difficult, but because doubting your own instructions for that long wears on a person. Command trusted one radio fragment over 3 weeks of visual evidence. He trusted command, and kept flying nights that showed him nothing, until the one night that showed him everything. The building on Shevchenko Street still stands. Partially, its rear wall collapsed and its cellar exposed to open air for the first time in months. Ukrainian engineers marked it for demolition in early February, removing entirely a structure that had briefly become the most dangerous position on this stretch of the Eastern Front. What began as a routine overnight patrol over a building everyone had already written off ended up rewriting the tactical map for an entire sector of Toretsk and closing off a counterattack that Russian forces had spent weeks quietly preparing to launch. 12 men in a cellar, invisible by day, exposed by a single pass in the coldest hour of the night. If this is the kind of frontline reconnaissance story you want more of, subscribe to Drone Combat Files. We track these operations as they're documented, not as they're rumored. And there's more of this sector's story still unfolding.